Yes, ma'am.
My name is Pam Lane Garrett. I'm from California State University. And I'd like to put a reframe on the discussion of our evolving identity. We're young.
Well, what?
We're young.
You're young.
Not me personally, but
Thank you for the clarification.
as a profession, we are youthful. And if we look at the history of professions over time, this type of identity discussion takes place at a certain moment in the development of a profession. And I don't see it as a crisis moment or a messy moment. I see it as important to the development of what we do. I think it's natural to go from a place where everything was prescriptive and very clear to a place where everything is a bit abstract and harder to articulate. That to me is the normal progression of the life of a profession. And I'm in for the long haul, and it's not a difficult thing to be part of. And I would encourage all of us to see it as normal and natural. Where education is still trying to figure out who they are.
So we shouldn't be traumatized by the transition.
No, I think it's to get out and say, oh, it's not what it used to be, this is not what I signed up for, it is probably debilitating to the future of the profession.
Thank you.
But hanging in is something that we can do, and whether or not we believe social justice is our mission, or whether or not we believe education is our mission, I think that there's a piece of this work for everyone. And maybe we can't do it all in our structures, but we can do a part of it. And that's why I think having sections is so important to us. And maybe it's less important to resolve who we are than to take the journey.
Thank you. It's an important clarification. Let's go to the side. Yes, on.
My name is Dorothy Garrison. I'm an AmeriCorps visit at the Community Mediation Center in Columbia, South Carolina. And my question is the tension between focusing on individual cases versus the greater structural, as y'all were talking about, the greater structural situations that make the individual cases. And I got the question recently, but kind of essentially, what about advocacy? And I said, well, that would probably discourage some people that may pursue our services from pursuing your services. So what is that line between focusing on the individual cases versus greater structural issues if we're trying to let everybody pursue our services?
Okay. Homer, Joyce, Robert?
One thing I could say is that let's be careful about, it's not an either or. I think that we have to be working at both the macro and the micro level. So where there are policy issues, and let me try to be a little bit more concrete. Where there is the possibility of institutionalizing some sort of conflict resolution mechanism, techniques, process, we ought to be working there. Where we see that there are consistently issues, and we think that we see something that offers a possibility of identifying those issues earlier on. As many say, upriver before it becomes crystallized. We ought to be trying to implement these kinds of processes there. That doesn't mean that we don't do the interventions, as Wallace was indicating as well. So it's not a question of either or, it's a tension. But I think that most tensions are good, and that we ought to simply recognize that it's difficult work, but we have to try to do it on both.
Let me just jump in and say on that point, when I think about this as a kind of a gateway, so although you're responding at the issue-specific level, you can always say to the parties involved, what I see happening here is something that involves larger issues. What do you think about the possibility of having a discussion excuse me, about that, and see if you can use the gateway of issue-specific to get into the larger structural concerns. That's one other way to think about it. Robert?
You know, it always seems to fall to me to talk from the underbelly, but, you know, look, let's be real candid about this in terms of the ultimate structural inequities that you're making reference to. In any particular conflict management situation, you can't do it. Truth is the first casualty in a negotiation. Now, in a culture dedicated to the quest for truth, that we can really believe that there is the right and fair and just answer, what we must understand, and one of the hardest lessons for us to learn in our mediation, is that truth gets set aside. The negotiation process is not a rational one. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. It may equal 5, 6, or 1. What we're looking at is trying to get this done to allow people to merely survive until the underlying structural inequities can be taken care of in another way at a different time. And all of our focus is, again, as we're looking at this, it's fine to talk about what you do in the room, and you can be rational and have your civil dialogue. The real question is that we've missed the point of, in our field, is how do we engage people and get them into the room in the first place? Again, I'm offering, most people don't want to do that when they are looking at the other person. They hate them. You know, or they dislike them. You know, there is almost no conflict. I will defy you to show me a conflict where there's not that emotional animosity and some measure of a fundamental attribution error. That person who's against me is simply wrong. I've been telling Homer he's wrong for years. He's been wrong. But the point is, how do you engage? When Barney Frank talked to that lady who accused him of trucking with Hitler and being a Nazi, it felt wonderful. We all cheered, or at least I did. Damn it, we finally told those people, those silly people, that talking to you was like talking to a dining room table, and it felt good. But it was probably the worst possible answer, because what it did was it cut off the conversation. Negotiators have not yet learned the lesson, and that's my fear of peacemaking and getting too much into the social justice end of it, is that we have too much of an idea of the right answer, as much as we deny it, and a moral certainty about how it should be done, so that mediators may in fact be their own worst enemies.
Thank you, Robert. Don't we all want to say at some point or another, it's like talking to the dining room table? I mean, we all want to say that. Okay, quick, we have about 8 minutes, so doing the math. Let's take more than one question at a time, and let's not add on to the rows, because I don't think we're going to have enough time. So, Ramona, we'll go with you, then we'll go to you, we'll take your question. Someone thinks something. So, Ramona?
I'm Ramona Buck from Maryland. I enjoyed hearing from all 4 of you. I was intrigued to hear Joyce and you say that ADR practitioners have a job to do in helping to acquaint diplomats and international negotiators both with terms, what they mean, and also processes. And I'm just wondering if you have any specific steps to recommend. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I guess I'm commenting on your initial question, Dr. Warfield, on what new roles we might engage in
Right.
as conflict resolution practitioners. And in my work I'm a PhD candidate in social work, and I'm working with the peace movement and looking at ways of empowering the peace movement to conduct their work more seriously or more cohesively. And I was wondering if well, clearly the person, I can't remember your name, but you might not be keen on this, but it seems like
What gave you the first hint?
social movements might be a venue of practice. There's no jobs there, but it might be a venue of practice to address some of these underlying structural issues that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Okay, respond to Ramona's question. Joyce?
Yes, thank you. I think the question from Ramona, actually, Ramona, I don't know where you are, where you went, there you are, thank you. I would expand. It's interesting to me that you refer to ADR practitioners because in fact, I was looking at the much broader community of conflict resolvers, so to speak. And I would say that there has been a very important start made several years ago through the Alliance for Peace Building with meetings with the State Department. And I think these have been somewhat effective, but more effective is the fact that we have infiltrated their ranks with some of the PhD students coming out of ICAR, coming out of some of the graduate programs who are now going into places like State Department, and who really have a theoretical understanding of what it takes to do conflict prevention and this kind of thing. So that's starting, but it's still very much in the minority. And I think part of what my colleagues here were talking about is all of us, this community is small, whether we include ADR people, international people, all of us together, we're small. Where were we when the United States invaded Afghanistan and Iraq? Why were we so quiet? So we need to work more on that, and by gaining credibility in that area of not criticizing government policy necessarily, no matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, but offering them alternatives and basically saying, here's what we know about de-escalating conflict, and providing alternatives in that way through op-ed pieces. And again, this is starting to be done, but it's being done not as much as it can be. Susan Allen-Mann has done a bunch of op-ed pieces. She's in the audience, and she's done a lot to contribute to this. But I think more of that and more of talking to your senators, congresspeople, to let them know that there's a community of expertise out there on how to design and do peace processes.
With respect to the second question, I really think there are jobs embedded in many of these issues. That if you're in the field doing NGO work, there are roles for conflict resolvers in those jobs, and it's just a matter of being able to pull them out for a closer examination. Jim and Tamara.
Thank you. I'm Jim Rosenstein. I'm from Philadelphia. I'm in private practice as a commercial mediator and public policy facilitator. It struck me that if I was hearing you, Wallace, and the panel correctly, that you've been identifying a significant conflict within our own field. That is, the conflicts that exist between and among ourselves as different types of practitioners, different areas of interest, different ways of working in the conflict resolution field. And if we acknowledge that we have these differences and the conflicts that arise out of these differences, it strikes me that it's going to be very difficult to do what Homer and I are trying to initiate here in terms of getting our message as a field out to the folks who we believe need to hear that message. Until we can begin to bring some, if not peace, at least some mutual understanding and more respect within our own field, our own community of conflict resolvers. Did I hear you correctly in that regard? And if so, do you have any suggestions about what we might do?
Panel?
What we go to?
Oh, sorry, Tamara. Yes, go ahead, Tamara.
Tamara Christian Distray from Denver. Can you hear me?
A little closer, Tamara. Ready?
The first is just maybe a comment on the reference to brain chemistry and structure, and the inference that we are somehow bound to fight or flight because of our brain chemistry and structure. Just wanting to also point out that we have evolved over eons other parts of the brain that are dealing with relationships and living in groups, because that's something we as humans have done for eons. And so that is just as central to our makeup as fighting or flighting or fleeing. But my main point and question has to do with a bit of my confusion about why looking at working on integrative solutions and in the room would be perceived as, looking at social justice somehow implies placating in the room. What I was taking from these comments is that what social justice might involve is looking at patterns across cases that seem to imply that certain things are producing these conflicts across repeated cases. I mean, one of the wonderful things about law is that law accumulates across cases, and eventually you start to see patterns. In medicine, you have this kind of practice where across cases, doctors will start to see patterns. Is there a way that we as a profession can grasp that same kind of practice where we look across cases and start to say, what can we do about changing the structure, and then how do we do that?
That's excellent, Tamara. I think Jim and Tamara's points are connected. Ben, want to respond, Homer?
Well, let me start with Jim's point, if I could. Because I think you're right, that we do have to reach a level of civility among ourselves in order to be able to do what I'm suggesting in terms of educating the psyche. Maybe one of those things is that, and Jim, this is part of what you were suggesting in your initiative, if there was at least some line of communication open among the various organizations on a regular basis across different presidents' terms, something that in which we at least were communicating with one another, not attempting to try to program with one another, but at least talking to one another about what we're doing, we might be able to come up with some sort of idea of what that education is. This is where I differ a little bit with Jim, and that is, I don't think that the message of what we are has to be worked out and become uniform in order for us to go forward and educate the public about what we do. Because I think that this discussion and dialogue represents the diversity of practices and viewpoints about what we do, and somehow we need to communicate that as well, that we're not one uniform method or technique, and that's okay.
My quick response to Jim is that, one of the places, though, that I do think we need to look at before we start to look out is to look in. And what I've observed about the professional organizations over the years is that we may have structured in a whole lot of linear thinking and borrowed too much from traditional professions in terms of its linearity, and fail to apply what we know has to be applied in conflict, which is a systemic approach. As Joyce talked about, the conflict that you see in front of you is only the tip of a larger piece. And to that extent, I certainly acknowledge the larger macro inequities that are going on. But note in ACR, as we have all of the different sections, that we have created the imagery that each kind of different mediation is wholly separate and apart from each other. So that employment mediators have nothing to learn from divorce, and divorce has nothing to learn from environmental, and there's not any of that kind of notion. Those of us who, perhaps in error, tried to build a larger organization, bringing the Academy of Family Mediators and SPIDER, Society of Professionals in Dispute Resolution, together, we're hopeful that we might learn from each other. And instead, what appears to have happened is that we've each retreated into our separate sections and then fight accordingly for resources within the organizations. It becomes a political fight. And secondly, is we have not had the hard conversations in this organization. There has been, as a field, I will observe that we are perhaps conflict avoiders.
Amen.
And frankly, and just not been willing to have some of the harder discussions openly and straightforwardly as we would encourage our clients to. And in fact, much of what we do is not anything that we would ever advise our clients to do in terms of how we've managed our own organization. So we really need to look within.
Good, thank you, Bob. Now, not to be overly linear about this, we have about 2 minutes, so we'll start with you, and then we'll go to our colleague on the left.
My first question was going to be, how are we on time? I'm Scott Adams. I'm a private mediator and consultant, and I had a really burning question I wanted to ask, and then Robert made a few statements, and now I have a comment, which if there's time, someone can respond to perhaps. But I was thinking, I guess I would respond to Robert's earlier comments by saying that I think peacemaking and collaboration and cooperation is perhaps more popular than you may think out there. And I think organizations like Search for Common Ground, or the work Adi Gabriela has done in Romania, who received the award yesterday. I mean, his whole network there wouldn't exist. Mediation might not exist in Romania to the extent it does now. Search for Common Ground certainly wouldn't exist if they didn't have this idealism. And if at some point they didn't market themselves as win-win cooperation, as peacemakers. Now, of course, so it depends on your audience. You probably wouldn't find the word peacemaker on my website. With my commercial clients or my labor management clients, I'm not going in and talking in those terms, at least initially. A particular Teamster client comes to mind who was could have been the poster person for everyone's probably stereotype of a Teamster, 6'7", 6'6", 250, 280. I didn't go and introduce myself as, hi, I'm a peacemaker, let's sit down and talk about cooperating with these other folks. Obviously, I would have been laughed out of the room.
You probably also didn't cross your legs at the knees either.
That said, in some of the volunteer work I do, for example, in schools with peer mediators and stuff, being a peacemaker for those kids is really cool. So that's a term we would use because they think it's appealing to them.
Right.
And so I really think it's about your audience and how we represent ourselves for what the parties need and what's appropriate for the context. So that was just my
Good point.
commentary.
Thank you.
There's time to respond. Great, thanks.
Yes.
I'm Caroline Ashton from Search for Common Ground.
Hi, Caroline.
That wasn't a setup, I promise.
Thanks for the commercial. And I know we had a great one yesterday. I was not here, unfortunately, to see Susan call remarks. But what's been missing from this panel for me has been, we've talked about Spider and the other organization.
AFM.
To form this organization, but another one of the organizations that was subsumed here was CRENET.
Right.
And we are not, I heard a couple of things from a couple of people up there about education, but what I mostly heard is us talking about ourselves as mediators and negotiators. I am not a mediator or a negotiator. I'm a trained mediator, but I only did it for a little while, of course, in child custody, and then I went on to other things. And what I do is international peace education work around the world. And I believe that we are, in that work, addressing social justice issues, and we are educating people. And I would like to see more of this done in our conflict resolution education programs in the schools here in the United States and colleges. But certainly at the international level, we are educating future decision makers about how to use all of these processes that we as negotiators and mediators use. But starting with them before they have a lot of preconcepts about it, before they're afraid to ask for help, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a whole other level of this work that really wasn't touched on here. And I would really like to see more of it and more public and yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you, audience and panelists. You've been all wonderful. It's time to move on and we're going to close this part of it.
No, you can go. Well, if they want this.